Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne-pestana, and our special guest today is Karen-Johnson, and she's here to share with us how Valentine's Day isn't all chocolate and roses for those experiencing grief and loss. So let's welcome to the show, Karen-Johnson.
Hey, thank you, Marianne. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my goodness. It's such an honor to have you here to talk about this. When we look at Valentine's Day or the month of February, a lot of times people kind of forget those who are grieving or have gone through traumatic losses.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because, that's part of our culture. Our culture wants to avoid sadness, despair, loss, and grief. And unfortunately, there's more and more of us that are experiencing it with COVID and with the opioid epidemic and deaths and overdoses and fentanyl. And there's just a lot going on, and a lot of people. It's not just the ones that passed and their family, it's their extended network of friends and acquaintances. And it's the heaviness of it, the community. So it's a lot that's going on, and a lot of people are trying to figure out how to deal with grief and loss and what to do, and feeling very stuck.
Yeah, I know, people get into this place where it's just so overwhelming. That's all you can see is that
Yes.
the grief and the loss. And I know you know about this firsthand, going what you went through. Why don't you share that with our listeners, a little bit about your story?
So my 27-year-old son, he and I are very, very close. And I was actually on a vacation in South Korea, and he went to a party. He was a financial guy, went to a party, got drunk, and they all decided they were going to try heroin, but they gave him way too much. He was a big guy, 6'8", and he died almost immediately. And I couldn't even get back home for 24 hours. And imagine getting a call when you're on vacation somewhere far, far away that your son is dead, So it was really shocking, really traumatic, and nothing was ever the same again for me. I could see him and feel him around me. I saw him come to me in the airport. I could see him as clear as day. And it was sort of a shocking introduction of life after death. And in the beginning, he was frantically trying to get my attention. I could see him, but I couldn't hear him. And so I ended up going to a medium and talking with her, and then getting some wonderful messages from him. So it was just a really long journey of kind of falling out of the matrix, getting out of the consensual reality that I was in. I was a administrative law judge in Washington, D.C., and a lawyer, and I had been doing criminal law and energy law of one sort or another for 30 years. And all of a sudden, none of that fit. None of it. And I was deeply, deeply, deeply in grief and couldn't figure out how to take the next breath, let alone what to do next. And I ended up going on quite a journey. I ended up selling everything, my home, my artwork, all my goods, and going on a 2.5-year journey to try to comprehend grief and loss, and to figure out, how could I get out of despair? Is there any way? And what is the wisdom of other cultures and other places that I might tap into to find a way out of grief and despair, and to find meaning and purpose, and to make sense of my son's life, and to honor it in a beautiful way? And so during that 2.5 years, went all over the world: Africa, Latin America, the Far East, India, Bangladesh, many, many, many places, and talking with all the wonderful wisdom people in those areas. And I came up during that journey, it was sort of gifted to me, a method to transform grief. So as we know, our loved ones go through this process of transformation, resurrection, and rebirth. And so do we as the bereaved. And that journey is the special journey of the bereaved. And and I overlaid it on top of the medicine wheel because along the way I came in contact with shamans and shamanism, and it is such a beautiful, beautiful practices, so many beautiful practices. So I ended up using that journey and along with the medicine wheel, putting it on top of the medicine wheel to help people to get unstuck, to become lighter, to awaken, and then to eventually create a new life out of the ashes of the old. And it was a process that I certainly didn't ever hear of and I didn't understand, and nobody was there to help me through. So I really wanted to be able to share this with people to help them to see that grief is not a one and done sort of thing. It's a journey. And it's a journey that carries a lot of energy with it that we can tap into. And we know this because we understand the transformational nature of marriage and parenthood. But in this culture, we forget about the transformational energy also of grief, and how that if we can tap into it, we can create a new life out of the ashes of the old, and one that honors our loved ones. We're not leaving them behind. We're actually honoring them. And so I decided at some point that I was going to try to find something new instead of live an empty, emotionless echo of my past life. Neither here nor there, just going through the motions. And I think a lot of people that are stuck in grief have that feeling. They're not here, not there, just stuck in their grief and not knowing how to find a way out. And so many of the books that I came across that were talking about grief talked about how someone might go about reconnecting with life. Maybe going to a movie, maybe going out to dinner, maybe dating if you lost a partner. These practical steps that one can take to begin to reconnect with life after deep grief and deep despair. But it seemed to me that I almost needed something, a precursor, something to happen before those steps. And so what I found was a journey that we take using 16 practices in a very ceremonial way, sitting with a candle and a pie pan and a notebook and sitting in silence and really asking for answers to really deep, important questions that we often avoid because we think, I'll think about that later. I don't want to deal with that right now. But what death brings us and loss brings us is the immediacy of the moment, the right now. So we can sit and think about things like non-judgment. Who are we judging? Who's judging us? And allow that to be released in the flames of a candle. And so shamans believe that fire is the pathway to rapid transformation. And I think many people, no matter what your religious proclivities are, or whether you have none at all, relate to candles and fire and maybe going into a temple or going into a church and seeing a place where you can light a candle for your deceased loved ones. And we know when we step into these places that they have an energy, they have this sacredness about them. And that's the kind of energy we want to get in touch with when we're asking ourselves these questions, to really sit in silence in that space of sanctuary, of sacredness, and ask ourselves the answers to 16 questions to move us along and begin to transform our grief. It's very hard to go on a date. It's very hard to go to a movie when you're carrying with you a lot of self-judgment, a lot of suffering, old stories. I know I carried a lot of stories about me and about I could have done this differently. I should have done that differently. I could go clear back to his babysitters when he was 2 years old and say, maybe that was it. Maybe I should have done something differently there. So, and I think a lot of people carry a lot of heavy, heavy stories. I should have been there. I should have made them go to the doctor. I should have, these many shoulds that we burden ourselves with and we ruminate over and over again. And this is a process of writing down these stories, these very painful scenarios that we create in our mind with the intention of releasing them and releasing them at the level of a neocortex instead of trying to deal with it at the physical realm. The neocortex is the realm of ceremony and sacredness. And so releasing them at that level lets things move lightly, like the blowing of a feather, instead of trying to move things at the physical level where everything is really heavy. Also, things we're attached to. So, one of the things I was deeply attached to that I didn't realize it was grieving mother. Wow, that's really heavy one. And what about widower? There are so many roles that we play and that we've taken on, and sometimes it's a relief to release that too. So the heavy aspect of being a grieving mother or a widow or a widower, to be able to sit in ceremony and allow that to go and open our hearts. After the releasing, we bring in newness. We bring in the energy of awakening, of transforming, of becoming lighter, so that we're not carrying all that heaviness with us. And some of us need to just get in touch with the practice of beauty. Sometimes people have spent so much time caretaking or so much time with a child that is suffering from addiction or illness that we've lost the capacity to seek beauty. We've forgotten. And so getting back in touch with those things that we used to find as having beauty and purpose and meaning is so important. So that we can begin to make time, for example, to go out and see a sunrise or a sunset or visit a museum or something simple, so that we get back into the practice of beauty. And many of us are such busy professional people or living very, very busy lives that we don't even allow ourselves to see beauty that happens right in front of us, especially if it happens at a place and time that's unexpected. So in Washington, D.C., Joshua Bell, a really world-renowned violinist, was at the metro station dressed as a homeless man playing a extremely expensive violin for 2.5 hours, some of the most beautiful pieces ever written. And I think he got something like $11 in his little cup, and maybe 5 or 6 people stopped. And this was a busy metro station with hundreds and hundreds of people frantically scrambling to get to work on time. And in their frantic scrambling, they couldn't even allow themselves a moment to appreciate this beautiful music and to stop and listen. And I think many of us are like that. We've just gotten numb and we don't even see beauty in front of us anymore. So getting back in touch with things that you find to be beautiful is so important on that journey. And then looking at things like non-doing. Non-doing is, these 16 practices are all ones that I think are familiar to anybody who has been involved with any kind of religious or practice or Buddhism or whatever, non-judgment, non-suffering, non-attachment, the beauty way. That's the south direction. That's getting rid of these old stories and becoming unstuck. And then moving on to the west direction of the medicine wheel, and that's all about getting rid of old karma, old family things, old ways of being and doing. And the first one of those is non-doing. And non-doing is such an interesting practice when we really look at it. And we sit and we ask ourselves, what are we so busily doing that we don't want to see? You know, often our busyness is covering up our avoidance of really heavy emotions, things that we don't want to look at or see. Ever catch yourself saying, oh, whoa, gosh, yeah, that's, I really ought to think about that, but I'll do that when I get this done. The laundry all of a sudden becomes exciting. Writing a check becomes, wow, so important. Taking the garbage out, right? All these things that we do to avoid looking at what are the heavy emotions? What are the things we don't want to feel? And sometimes what we don't want to feel is grief and loss and despair and hopelessness and sadness. And so taking a moment to sit with those feelings with the intention of allowing them to move through you, allowing them to be released, can be tremendously healing. And then non-collusion with the consensual reality. Oh my gosh, so many of us are living lives that have been defined by family, society, culture. I know for myself, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And back in the day, that was considered to be really unsafe for women. And that was just before cell phones and emails and all those sorts of things. So people, when they were archaeologists in other countries, they were really off somewhere. And so my parents persuaded me it'd be much better for me to go to law school. And that's what I did. And 30 years later, after having death be this doorway for me to see that, wow, I'm really tired of driving in the second worst traffic in the country for 30 years. And I'm really tired of sitting in court and sitting inside all day long. My soul is longing to be free. And so if I could do anything I wanted to do, what would it be? That's like such a pivotal question that maybe most of us haven't asked for a really, really long time. What would you do? Where would you go if you didn't have to worry about money and responsibilities and all those things? What does your heart long for? And for me, it was to travel, to get in touch and go see ancient cultures and see ancient places and figure out a way to make that happen. So one way to make that happen was selling the house and the cars and everything and going on this great journey. Everybody's a little different. You know, we all have different dreams, but the point is to find yours. Is what you're doing really nurturing your soul, or are you just caught up in mortgage and car payments and kids and marriage and all these things, and you're really feeling exhausted by it all? Not that you should drop it all at a moment's notice, but if you see it, you can begin to think about, what would I do if? And once you start thinking about what would I do if, opportunities come to you and ways to make things happen that you may not even be aware of or be thinking of at that moment, because we're pushing it down so deep so we don't have to look at it. And then fearlessness. Wow, the practice of fearlessness, to actually sit with fear and say, I'm going to do it anyway. And the greatest story I love is a story, I think I might have heard it years ago in Guideposts or something like that, but it was a story about a fireman. And there's a burning building and the ladder is up to the window, and the fireman says, come on, come down the ladder. And the person says, no, I'm afraid. I can't, I'm afraid. And the fireman looks at the person and says, then do it scared. Do it scared. And sometimes that's what's required. We make this change. We take the advantage of an opportunity, and we do it scared. It's not always wonderful, but we do it scared. Uncertainty. And then those are the south direction and the west direction. And we're really letting go of old ways of thinking and being and doing, and maybe even old objects around the house. Maybe it's time to clear the clutter, clean out the drawers, let go of things that maybe were handed down to you that have sort of heavy energies and old heavy stories associated with them. Maybe it's time to release them and let them go off somewhere to have a new life with somebody else that isn't weighted down by all those old stories. I know a lot of the things that were passed down to me from various women in my family. Gosh, there were so many heavy stories of people not getting along, or husbands losing businesses due to alcohol, and so many heavy, dark stories. I felt like I had a cabinet full of heavy, dark stories. And it was really wonderful and made me much lighter to let those things go. And to allow my daughter to have the opportunity to say no. I mean, what things that were passed down to me, I never had that opportunity. My mother said, these are important. You will have them. You will take them. And so I gave my daughter the opportunity to say, shall I? Do you want this? And if you don't want it, say no. And, she said, now, Mom, are you sure? Or are you going to come back and be mad at me because I didn't take something? And I said, nope, this is it. You take it or not take it, but things have to go. Because, she was very supportive of my journey and going on a journey. So she knew it was time. Things had to go. And even my son's room that I had made into a shrine, and I think many of us do that. We make our loved one's room into a shrine. And this can be for somebody you lost, a relationship. Doesn't necessarily mean through death. It could be divorce, anything. We tend to make little shrines. And even to be able to release the things in his room, to be able to let that all go. So I wasn't living in the past. I could create a new future. And that's so important too. It's not easy, but it's so important. And then we move along to the awakening part. The awakening part is associated with the north direction of the medicine wheel and hummingbird medicine. So we're awakening from the nightmare, which is so important, that nightmare that we're lost in. And it can be lost due to death. It can be lost due to the loss of a business, loss of stability, loss of this world that we're in that just seems so unreal, that's changed and shifted so much that we can't do things that we used to do so freely, like travel. So many things require steps and procedures and things that didn't require that before. And so now we're going to start looking at things like beginner's mind, having this attitude of everything is new instead of the attitude of been there, done that. And then living consequently. What if we lived like everything we did mattered? A lot of times we live like nothing matters. But what if everything we did had consequences? And consequences not from the past, but for our futures. So what if we began living every day like it really did matter? And it mattered for us and all those around us. And then the practice of transparency, allowing ourselves to be truly seen. Most of us hide so much from other people. We walk up to somebody, how are you? Great. How are you? Fine. And meanwhile, we've got this huge amount of sadness and despair and hopelessness inside. And how are your kids? Oh, great. My kids are absolutely fantastic. They're doing this and that and the other thing. And meanwhile, they're worried to death because their child is partying and drinking, but nobody wants to say these things. And so once I allowed myself to become transparent to people around me, well, I could sit with people over a cup of tea and really hear what was on their hearts. I could hear the truth about their children and the truth about their marriages and the truth about being a sandwich generation and trying to take care of kids and elderly, and the truth about worries and fears about all sorts of things that we just don't want to talk about, and certainly don't want to talk about with anybody who's got that shield up around them that's not being transparent. And then also the next one, living in integrity. Oh my gosh, what about that? How can we live in integrity? What does that even mean? It means choosing a life that is really yours, not because you want to please anybody else. So I had friends that I could have chosen a shaman path. I could have chosen to follow the path, Indigenous path of the Lakota. I really loved both of those things, and I was really deeply into spiritualism. And I really kind of wanted to choose the Lakota path because I had lots of friends at that moment, and the shaman one was kind of unknown, but I really learned that my heart was calling for the path of the shaman, to follow that. And even though I had friends that were welcoming me and hoping and wishing I could be there, I had to follow my own path. And so it's an opportunity to look and see, how are you living your life? Are you living in integrity? Are you really living an honest life about what you want? And if you aren't, can you begin to take steps or think about steps you might take to begin to live in integrity? And then finally, we get to the east direction of the medicine wheel. And here we begin to create a new life out of the ashes of the old one. And it's so much easier after we've done the preceding 12 exercises, because there's a lightness of spirit about us. And we're honest with ourselves, and we're honest with where we are and what we've done. And then now we can begin to see, where do we really want to go? And there's the practice of no mind, not even beginner's mind, but no mind, where we just don't rely on the mind. We rely on our inner knowing and sitting in silence and really getting to know ourselves and what we really want. Disengage from our thoughts and engage with our inner wisdom. And then no time. So we get out of time. You know, a lot of us are trapped in the past way we've done things, Newtonian physics, A plus B equals C. And many of us live our lives doing the same sorts of things over and over and over, adjusting a little bit and getting slightly different results, but not really breaking free of the past. And so no time is this experience of allowing our lives to be guided by synchronicities, allowing ourselves to see opportunities and possibilities that we may have overlooked before. And then one of my favorites, owning your own projections. Oh, I love this one. When we realize that everything we see in others is a reflection of ourselves. If you say to yourself, oh, I don't like this person, or I don't like this or that about this person, it's really saying, I don't like this or that about myself. Or if you say, wow, this person is fantastic, I wish I could be more like that, you're really saying, wow, I love that part of me, that aspect. And so Marianne Williamson says it really greatly that, you know, it's not just our fears that scare us, it's our brilliance. And so to be able to really just say, wow, you know, I like all these aspects of me, or I'm comfortable with them. I know cranky Karen and annoyed Karen and Karen that can't figure out the TV remote. And I also know the brilliant one and the kind one and the happy one and the fun one. So when we let them all out and we see all aspects of ourselves, then we're not afraid anymore of being who we are and owning who we are. And then the last one I love is called Indigenous Alchemy. Wow, that's a big one, right? What does that even mean? I ask myself. So indigenous means native or basic, and alchemy, transformation. So it's a basic native desire for transformation. And I think that's so important for all of us to know that being stuck isn't inherent to our natures. Inherently, we have this basic instinct, desire for transformation. And so that's what we're tapping into by going through all these practices. We're tapping into that innate desire for transformation, to create a new life out of the ashes of the old, to honor our loved ones so that they too can be free. As we free ourselves from being stuck, we free them too. From, I always tell people heaven or nirvana or sukhavati or wherever you think that people go when they transform, it's not prison. So they can come back and forth, and they're watching us and they're seeing us being stuck in our despair and hopelessness, and it keeps them from being all that they can be on the other side. And so we want that too. We want to release them and release ourselves and find ways to live a life that honors them. So my way happened to be writing. Your way might be contributing to a charity of some kind, or creating art or music or dance or whatever it is to honor your loved one and to help those around you to see a way forward. Because that's the worst part, is when you lose hope and you don't see a way forward. So we want to help each other. Ram Dass wrote a great book, and just walking each other home. And that's kind of what we're doing. And we want to walk each other home, walk each other out of hopelessness and despair into new lives. Ones we didn't ask for, and ones we would do anything to change, but yet here we are. Here we are. And so that's the journey. And if I left people with anything, it would be to have you remember that this is a journey through grief. It's not a one and done. Nobody should pressure you to get over it, or it's time to move on. Those are just cliches that other people say to make themselves feel better because they're uncomfortable with our grief. So allow yourself to take a journey. Allow yourself to think the deep thoughts and transform your lives. And I wish I could tell you there wouldn't be any pain and you would never experience pain again, but that's just not true. The pain is there, but the suffering, all the suffering that we carried around with us, we can be free of. So at the 5-year mark, I was just knocked over by waves of pain because I knew that, wow, he's not ever going to have a child, or I'm not going to have a grandchild. And I don't get to see him become 40 and 50. And I miss so much by not having been in my life. But that was pain. And it was not complicated pain by feeling guilty, feeling shame, blame, or guilt. All those emotions and all those old stories had been released. And so I could just, rest in my missing him without a lot of complicated issues. And many people have really complicated grief, compound grief, many different things they're grieving. Anticipatory grief. Oh my gosh. They know someone's really ill and they know that maybe death or loss is right around the corner. Maybe someone's lost in addiction. Parents are stuck in this anticipatory kind of grief. Maybe old grief. Gosh, people sometimes carry around grief from 20, 30 years ago. Old miscarriages, old abortions, old things they never talked about. And other kinds of grief, old lovers, old partners, things that you never really grieve properly. And then fresh grief. Oh gosh, fresh grief when it just first happens. And sometimes we just have to allow ourselves to sit with that very fresh grief and maybe wait a little while before taking the journey. Wait till you're ready to take that journey, but don't wait forever. I knew a man who waited for 16 years, never told his colleagues or anyone that his son had passed, and 16 years later, he completely fell apart. So the thing with grief is you can either experience it now or you can experience it later. You can experience it as falling apart. You can experience it maybe even as cancer eating you up. So we want to allow ourselves to express and feel and grieve and mourn and transform our lives.
Well, I really appreciate you going through all that, Karen. And your story is so intertwined with the lessons and how you bring that forward. And it's not something that I think an easy discussion could be had about. I mean, the thing is that when we go into depth, we really understand how that all comes together and how that impacts us when we're going through grief and loss.
Yeah. I love telling my stories. For each one of these 16 practices, I have a story. Mm-hmm. And I invite people to then write down their own stories because we all have our stories. We all have lots of stories. We may not even know how many stories we have and how many things we're carrying. So that's an invitation to get in touch with the deepest parts of yourself.
Well, I know you share also in your book about how there are different types of grief and that people mostly don't even consider grief. I'd love for you to share some of those.
Yeah, sometimes, people don't even think about things like, gosh, a relationship maybe they had when they were in their 20s or in their teens that maybe they never really got over. Maybe it often happens that people lost a parent when they were very young. And in losing a parent when you're very young, sometimes people around you tried to shield you. Lord, we won't tell the details. We won't say this. We won't say that. We won't let them know. And meanwhile, the child knows that something is being hidden. And many times people want to explore what was that and find that. And I always get closure is such an overdone term, but come to terms with maybe their parent, who they really were and how they really, really were lost. And so many things, losing a business. Yeah, that can be really hard too. Losing certainty. Shall I get a vaccine? Shall I not get a vaccine? Life got very complicated. And so there's so many things that we can experience as great loss. So that's just an example, but so many different things are coming up. And like I said, the opioid crisis and COVID, all the deaths from COVID, really two big areas where there's just so many losses and so many places where people want to hide and say, oh, my child's not an addict, right? We all want to hide there, and then they die of an overdose. And so we feel very outed. Like I can't hide anymore. And suddenly everybody's looking at me like I'm a bad parent. I mean, they looked at me that way for sure. I felt very judged. Like my child wouldn't do that. Oh, you were a bad parent. You were probably too permissive, or you weren't home enough. You worked too much. All these judgments come down on us and we can internalize them. And so looking at all that too and saying, letting go even of the illusion that we were the perfect parent or the disillusion that other people did a better job. Everybody else is a better parent. I mean, there were a lot of kids that were with my son that night and they didn't all die, but they all did the same thing. And so, is one any better than the other? No, they all participated in this event gone horribly, horribly wrong.
I hear how you talk about people judging you, and I, especially in the career you had, I mean, you're a federal judge,
Right.
So to have that, be there. And also one of the things that really just has really stuck with me and has bothered me is how your work handled the death of your son. I mean, I just couldn't believe that. I was floored.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more of a dialogue and discussion about death and how to handle it in business and corporations, but it's still certainly not a subject that has been explored nearly enough. So, I was told I could have 2 hours off from work for his funeral.
Wow.
And, when you're grieving, nothing is making a lot of sense. And so, but even then I thought that's kind of ridiculous. And someone explored a little further and said, okay, well, you could have a couple days of administrative leave. And I suppose if you had to go on vacation, you could take some vacation time, but this decision's due and that's due and this is coming up and you have a hearing. And we'd have to reschedule all these things. And, and so after a week I went back to work and I was in absolutely no condition to be at work around people or trying in any way to make sense of anything. And so I kind of just told myself, well, it's better for me to go into work. At least I'm not sitting home alone all day long or I had people coming and helping, but still sitting, and at least this will give me something to do. But it was completely the wrong thing to do, right? I should have just said, well, you're just all going to have to figure out a way because I'm out of here until I can cope. I mean, I remember going to a meeting and sitting in the meeting and trying desperately not to bust out in tears and leaving the meeting as soon as so I was not in any shape to be there. All I could think about was my son and his death. I couldn't make sense of any legal arguments or much of anything else. So I think, that businesses and environments just aren't sensitive to grief, and how people who are grieving really can't even make good decisions and maybe need to sit down with someone. Some workplace environments have different opportunities for you to sit down with counselors and things for various reasons, and maybe offering some counseling so that people can even begin to figure out if they're ready to come back to work.
So recently I read an article, and I think it was in the Washington Post, but it talked about how companies really need to take a hard look at how grief is handled in the workplace, and they really need to develop more compassion. And hearing your story about a mother who is burying her child and then expected to return back to work and do all these requirements that they put on you, I think is just inhumane. And I felt so just upset that even happened.
Yeah, for sure. And nobody really can realistically be expected to shoulder that kind of load after that. And I think, that's part of it. Far be it from me to tell every business how to run, but I have been a professional and a businesswoman for many, many years. And so I know that there are avenues and opportunities for this dialogue to take place. And there are ways that people can be put in touch with counselors and things like that. So there are opportunities for this discussion to be held, and ways that employees can be supported. And when you're supported, then your recovery is faster. When you're supported, you can figure out and see possibilities and potentials that you maybe can't see when you're totally wrapped up in sadness and despair. So you need kind of like that extra person, someone to sit with you and to figure things and to try to form a plan. And yes, we can do that privately and we can get counselors privately and things like that. But it's also good to have someone that really understands your particular corporate climate so that you can reintegrate in a way and in a pace that is reasonable for your climate, for your business, for where you work, and for who you are. So yeah, I think this is a big dialogue, and families too are under tremendous stress right now. And we can talk about loss of stable daycare, childcare, schooling. I mean, parents don't know from 1 minute to the next whether their child's going to be exposed to COVID at school and they have to leave school and they can't come back for 8 days. And are they going to be learning in school? Are they going to be learning online? It's tremendously stressful for parents, and especially for single parents that just have no certainty. So mourning the loss of certainty in our world is important too, because it's really weighing heavy on so many people.
I know you have a workshop coming up that I like to talk about, because I think, here we are coming up on to Valentine's Day, and, February is considered the month of love. And for a lot of people, it's definitely not that. What's your workshop that you have?
Yeah, so I'm going to do it on Sunday, the 13th, from 7 to 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. And it's a chance to get together in community with people who are experiencing grief or loss of any kind, and just to be with each other and to talk about grief and how grief might be perceived as a journey, and how they might be able to begin to work through their grief in a way that suits them, and to talk about the different experiences that we've all had with grief and loss and despair and where we are. And then I'd like to do a prayer for everyone who's experiencing loss of any kind. So we call it a despacho in shamanism, but it's a prayer bundle, and I'll make it out of, I think I'm going to why not use red roses, right? So we'll have our own red roses, and into the petals, we can blow prayers for ourselves, for our families, and for our loved ones. So that we have this moment, many of us never take or never offer just a moment of silence and prayer, and to be honored, to honor ourselves and each other and our loved ones and all our losses. And so I just want to provide that opportunity for people so they can sit for a moment and sit together in community. Community is so important too, as we've lost more and more community. So if we have to have our community online, so be it. It can be a community of the bereaved. And we'll sit together and talk together and pray together and just have a moment just for us.
I think that's so empowering, and for the people that will be attending, they'll be able to, kind of, take part in their own way.
Yes.
And of the Valentine's Day kind of prayer despacho that you're going to be doing. So it can incorporate like loved ones and pets and other things.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Anything, any being you've lost, or any person, place, or thing, I like to say. Anything that you're ready to just grieve a little and not be alone in your grief, and realize that sometimes we feel so alone, like the whole world is this champagne glasses and chocolate and dinners out at fabulous restaurants and evening gowns, and here we are sitting alone with our grief in our PJs. And so you're not alone. People are not alone, and we can come together and just be together and pray together, and just take this moment to reflect and see perhaps just a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. A little moment of seeing that, okay, maybe there's a way forward. And maybe I too could take a step forward. maybe I can just take one little step today, or maybe it's just enough to be in community and to pray and to know that when I'm ready, there's some steps that I can take.
So what I really like about your workshop on Sunday is that it is a free workshop, so anyone can attend. If they're feeling pain, you don't have to get dressed up. You can, either call in or be there via Zoom, because I know then you're going to do your talk and do a little teaching on that as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. A little talking, a little teaching, a little praying. That's sort of my way, my mantra. And I like to sweep as many people up into it as possible. And I love to make free offerings, because that way people don't have to worry even about, oh gosh, do I find my credit card and what about PayPal and figure all that out? No, you just come. Just come.
Where can they register for this workshop that you're doing?
So you can go to my website, Karen-Johnson, JOHNSON.net. And there you'll find a link. You sign in with your email, and you find a link, and you can then sign up for the class.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Karen. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about how Valentine's Day isn't all roses and chocolate for those who are experiencing grief and loss. And also, I cannot wait for your free class that you're doing on Sunday, and people can go to your website at karenjohnson.net for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.